Welcome back. This is your host, Siris King. In this segment, I'm going to talk about anthropocentrism, homocentrism, and your spirituality. Now, those may seem like big words, but really, at the core of those words is really just an understanding that as human beings, when we approach all things, but I'm coming from the spiritual aspect, we tend to put ourselves at the center of all things, even so much so that let's say when you take the concepts of spirituality and religion, we start to look at our gods have very human like attributes. They get jealous, you know, they kill people, they have affairs, they fight. I mean, everything human our gods sometimes seem to have. And even when you go past the concept of gods, if you look at almost entirely if you look at every spiritual system right now, for the most part, 99.9% of them, humanity is at the forefront. Now, they might give you different reasons. Some spiritual systems may say, well, humans are the only ones who have a logical mind, and because we have a logical mind, we're the only ones who can almost like kind of absorb enough mental energy where we can look at ourselves and say, I want to basically get past the physical world, right? So the argument for some systems will be, if you're an animal or plant, you don't have a conscious mind, so you can't get past the physical world. You're basically trapped in matter. And these concepts seem fairly, I mean, for the most part, when you're coming at it from the human angle, it seems pretty straightforward. Most people would say, yeah, I kind of see that. And this is why sometimes there's many reasons, but there's at times an antagonistic relationship between science and religions, right? Spirituality included, because any person with a basic scientific understanding would say, listen, if spirituality was real, if it was something that's in a sense, you're so-called enlightened, you're so-called beyond the human construct, then why does all the religions, right, even the ones who are supposedly practice and preach enlightenment, have traces of anthropocentrism and homocentrism in it? Why? Doesn't make any sense, because if you're truly if your consciousness is of this next world, your spiritual systems would not have that. And the interesting thing is, what I look at it is that I could tell, like, I have to admit, I actually think the scientific point of view is right, because if you look at the oldest spiritual systems, because I think what's happened is that a lot of people have gotten confused with a lot of the modern systems. And when I say modern systems, I could be talking about systems that's even 2,000, 3,000 years old. To me, that's still modern, right? Especially when you're dealing with spirituality. Because honestly, for the time humans started to walk, right, and we started to think, I mean, other than farming, hunting, planting, maybe having families, the next thing is you look up at the stars, you say there's something beyond this, right? So spirituality has been with humans for a long time. But I find it interesting that if you look at the older spiritual systems, the spiritual systems that are not modern, the spiritual systems that talk about 6, 10, 15,000 years old, when you look at them, they don't really have those traits. The traits of the human is number one and everything else is number two. Look at alchemy. Look at astrology. Look at so-called shamanism. And shamanism is the best example. In shamanism, straight up, the shamans will tell you, like, hey, nah, plants, animals, what I mean? We just a caretaker. That's it, right? So if you look at shamanism, you're not going to see that. And when I say shamanism, like animism, any type of naturalistic spiritual systems that's dealing with nature, whether you call it Sangoma, Bushman, shamanism, whatever, right? You're going to see they don't have that. Look at alchemy. In alchemy, the thing that's the closest to God is not humans, it's actually metals and minerals, right? Plants is run up, so metals is first, minerals is second, plants is third. Now, in alchemy is basically, you could make the argument, came before any spiritual system. The only spiritual systems that you could rival with is what I'm saying: shamanism, alchemy, and the third is astrology. In astrology, study the planets and the stars. The planets and the stars were considered the most divine essences. The essences that's closest to God. Humans are just lucky that we could understand the planets and then we could decode the secrets of the universe from that. So if you look at those three spiritual systems, humanity is not at the center of those systems. Now you could get into deep and you could say, well, those systems are very flexible, which they are, right? So even though people may just look at astrology as a study of stars, astrology was also a study of stars, but also psychology, how the stars affect your mind, right? And that will be true for all life forms. So even animals and plants will fall under astrology, unlike what a lot of people think. Animals and plants will fall under astrology. Most modern astrologers don't know that because again, this humocentric mindset has creeped into even astrology. But we're talking about the oldest forms, alchemy, same thing. The human was unique in the sense that the human can take metals, plants, and minerals, and they could have psychological effects on the mind. Hence, some people have spiritual alchemy, right? So then you go into systems like yoga, which is basically alchemy, but just a spiritual part. So when I say that spirituality having this humocentric mindset is wrong, it's not necessarily that it's wrong per se. It's more the fact that when you allow it to give you a false confidence that you're actually studying the real spiritual world, that's the problem. It's kind of like being in kindergarten, and sometimes kindergarten, even pre-K. Perfect example, pre-K. Pre-K, you have kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. Pre-K is kind of like they're not even giving you curriculum yet. You're just understanding how to deal with people, how to deal with other kids, right? You're not studying anything yet. Honestly, if a spiritual system is really constructed the right way, that's actually how it's supposed to be. When you look at spiritual systems that study the mind, people think that means everything's all mental and I'm supposed to practice escapism. But even that is humocentric in thinking. When you think about it, there's no animal on earth that says, I want to escape. Every animal looks at the environment and finds a way to actually live in harmony with the environment. People who practice this type of escapist thinking don't follow those traits. They say, oh, everything's all mental, forget the physical world, let me just go in space. That's what they say. So anyone with a scientific mind will look at that and say, you know what? If you guys is pretending to be so spiritual, why is that humocentric standpoint or mindset leaking into your spirituality? So much that it leaks into our spirituality so much that it goes beyond eventually humans being the center of the universe. Then it goes into humans of a certain race because it gets more corrupted over time. So eventually it goes from humans, right? All humans are the center of God in the universe, where even our gods are human, right? They display human traits. We go from that to a certain race is superior, whether it's white people, whether it's black people, whether it's Asian people, whether it's not saying any race, but I am the best, right? If you don't come from India, I don't want to hear you, right? They may not say, oh, I'm better than this one, but they would say, well, my country has the best spirituality, and if you don't come from this country, then you don't have a spiritual system that's equivalent to mine. Or, oh, I'm the chosen people. Eventually, yes, it starts off as humocentric, right? Which by itself can be contained. But then when it gets corrupted, it goes into species, and my race is best. And scientifically, scientists will tell you straight up like this. Honestly, you can make the argument there's 3 or 4 species on Earth that might be able to beat human beings in terms of, if you look at them pound for pound, if you look at them in terms of the importance to the ecosystem. Actually, probably if you look at the importance of the ecosystem, it's probably more than 4. So scientists would be like, nah, I don't see anything special about you. And then the spiritualists would look at the scientists and say, oh, they're material and thinking. They haven't evolved mentally. But yet the spiritualist is not asking the question, well, if you are so evolved, why is this humocentric standpoint leaking into your way of thinking? It's leaking into your way of thinking so much that you don't even notice it. So when we say escapism, somebody who practices escapism would say, oh, I'm enlightened. The physical world is a prison. The physical world is bad. I have to get rid of it. But if you judge humans as animals, and that human beings are animals, whether you like it or not, no animal displays those traits. So then there's something wrong. And like I said, if it just started as, oh, humans are the center of the universe, by itself that could be contained, because if you take a system like yoga, if you come and say, well, I want to learn about my mind, if it's taught to you correctly, which these days is becoming less and less, it's fading in terms of how correctly it's being taught. But if it's taught correctly, then when your mind, basically what it's really doing is, when they're saying you're getting enlightened, it's really saying you're getting healed. It's really saying, in the past, a lot of ancients were at a higher state of consciousness than we are now. So when you practice a psychological system like what yoga really is, that connects you to the divine, that heals your mind, you should be able to then with this new mindset, look at the world different, and find a way to integrate yourself into the world. And when it's time to supposedly die, yes, there's large parts of the world that deals with the unseen world. So you go to the unseen world, but it wouldn't be something that you run to, because if you're in the physical, you're supposed to have a physical experience. And not only are you supposed to have a physical experience, again, look at nature. Every plant and animal, every microbe, not only are they here, but they're doing their job. So they're doing their job serving nature. So the fact that it's hard for people to even understand that, I would have people listen to this video and say, "Oh, humans are superior," and they'll give me 4 or 5 reasons, most of the time starting with the power of the mind. And that's the problem. This human way of thinking has crept into basically our way of life when it comes to spirituality. And if it just stays that humans are the center of the universe, you could kind of contain it. But then it goes into, now we have people who, they would say, if you have a certain pigment in your skin, you're superior. It would say, well, if you've come from a certain continent, you're superior. And then they use pseudoscience to prove it, because you might have some people who say, well, people, certain races are smarter than other races. Scientists are kind of known now, race in itself, they kind of botched it. There's no real such thing as race scientifically. When you're talking about race, you're talking about social constructs. Even when one race looks darker than other races, there's some races that are, like, Aborigines look the same color as, let's say, West Africans, but yet genetically, supposedly, of course, people from Europe are actually closer to, I shouldn't say West Africans, to East Africans than Aborigines are. That's what I'm talking about. Like, when you are actually trapped by how things look visually, you run into some serious problems. But spiritual systems are supposed to kind of offset that. But instead, because many of the systems can't look within, they didn't offset that. But as new systems get created from the older corrupted systems, the newer systems become more corrupted than the original systems. So, when people want to say, well, I still think humans are the superior species, and they list it, all you gotta do is just look at the older spiritual systems. The older spiritual systems don't even say that. Even when you talk about things like magic, right? When somebody says magic and somebody says, oh, magicians believe in things that don't exist, like fairies and jinns and mermaids and all kind of hocus pocus stuff, there's another way of looking at that. What if those things might not exist the way people say they exist, but they could exist as psychological symbols? Because shamanism is like that, animism is like that. When you see a snake just isn't a snake. A snake is actually a psychological symbol within yourself that you can learn from. So if someone says fairies and mermaids and all this other jinns, all this other stuff, even if it doesn't exist, what if it's just a symbol of something that's a psychological state in you that you forgot? And they call it a mythological being because at one time we tapped into that state, but we don't tap into that anymore. And it would make sense that we don't, because when we say mythological being, that's something that's not human. So if that's something that's in us that we don't tap into anymore, that we forgot, and then we practice a spiritual system that says, oh, humans are the superior system, now you see why there's problems in the world. And now you see why scientifically the spiritual community still hasn't, there's a lot of aspects of how they conduct themselves that you just have to have a high school scientific mind, and you'd be like, no, that was still made by human mind. I don't believe you're enlightened. If you come to me enlightened, it's supposed to be something that blows my socks off. And not blows my socks off in terms of escaping. Blows my socks off like, oh, you practice spirituality, and then you could give a scientist a scientific formula that the scientist doesn't understand. Now stuff like that is next level. That's the difference. And a lot of spiritual people at this current time don't have this mindset. And I think it's because these terms I'm saying right now, we don't even know they exist, but you should look them up. And there are whole people who study these things, and you will understand from studying them that, yes, the homocentric way of looking at things has now corrupted spirituality to such a point where I don't know if it could be fixed. Because even when you practice a spiritual system, that's pretty cool. Like, that has a psychological aspect of it, and psychologically they'll help you become better human, they'll help you understand the mind. That standpoint of being able to 100% of the time correct this homocentric way of thinking is much harder. Even when you look at people who practice so-called dark magic, and they would practice it, and they will come up with all these things. They'll talk about beings who exist before humans. Even that's basically still a person kind of saying there's things beyond this human construct. And even if you don't want to get into things beyond the human construct, scientifically you would say the humans in general are nothing special. Honestly, scientifically, the Earth is more special than humans. Honestly, because the Earth has things that it's almost mathematically impossible for it to actually all be in one spot. A lot of planets in our solar system, the continents don't move. Right, the continents don't move, and the continents move in our planet, and we can basically life can kind of exist separately, isolated, and when you come together, you could have a whole bunch of mixes that you couldn't have if all the continents were together. Our magnetic field is unique. Like, we have things about this planet. There's a lot of unique elements to this planet. Even when you breathe in oxygen, one time this planet wasn't really oxygen based; it was more methane based, right? And a lot of life forms that you see now in that atmosphere could not exist. But yet we have such diverse microbes on this planet that eventually they were able to make oxygen, and then eventually when they made it, the plants took over. Those things are unique, because when they observe other planets, they don't see that. Because even in order to have such diverse life as we have now, you have to have perfect temperature. Even things like the moon, right? People say the moon one time came from Earth. Some people say that, or some people say the moon man came from another planet. Even if the moon was not there, life as we know it wouldn't even exist. So even when you look at the moon, and the moon is actually responsible for creating life or helping life grow the way it has, the moon is in a perfect position. Earth is in a perfect position. Those are a lot of things that are lucky that you don't have on other planets. So you might have other planet that has the right temperature, might be the right distance from the sun, but it doesn't have titanic plates where the continents are moving. It may not have a moon in a certain position where it can make it cool enough that a lot of other life forms can come in, because the moon actually protects us from the sun to some extent. So they may not have a magnetic field that can protect the planet from solar radiation or cosmic radiation. I mean, that's a lot of things that's so-called luck that we have. So scientifically, yeah, the Earth is in itself is actually more special than human life form. I mean, we're talking about everything's centered around humans. The humans only came into to the Earth like 2.5 million years ago. You talking about the planet is about 4.6 billion years. Humans, if you want to say 25 million, you could say 25 million if you want. That's not even 10% of 4.6 billion, right? And in fact, that's probably like 1% if even. So when you say, oh, humans are special, man, no. Well, if you're going to talk about something special, it's probably the life forms that were here before human beings. That, Earth is 4.6 billion. There's a few life forms that might have been here about 3.6, like a billion years later. Those people might have to say as being more special. Anyway, especially since most of those life forms that we're talking about, which is usually microbes, we have more of them in our body than we have human cells. So when you look at it from that angle, a lot of spiritual systems have a lot of growing up to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you practice in those systems and you see that humocentric element in those systems, be very cautious and still learn from those systems, but learn in a way where you're no longer bound by the flaws of those systems. So I hope this helps. This is Siris King. Till next time. Peace.